I think going forward, especially now, we really have to question the status quo. I think we have to be very bold. The world is different than it was 2 years ago. Enablement 2 years ago was a nice to have. Now companies are realizing it is a must have.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Barry, and joining me this week was Sheevaun Thatcher. Sheevaun is somewhat of a legend in the sales enablement space. She created the role before it was actually even a role. About 15 years ago, she started performing the role of player coach, as she talks about in the episode, for a company that she was at. So she's been there from the beginning and has seen the sales enablement profession develop into what it is right now. We spend this episode diving into her wisdom over those years, and especially her time at RingCentral, where she grew an incredible team and grew the company from a $20 stock to an almost $500 stock in those 5 years. In addition to unpacking what it means to be a player coach, we talk about the importance of taking risks, learning from mistakes and not seeing them as failures, of valuing innovation over incrementation, of taking an holistic or systemic view of a sales organization. We also talk about tribal knowledge and how you can't train this top down. You have to enable people bottoms up. And you're going to love Sheevaun's detailed explanation of her methods using one-on-ones, the cadence and consistency and focus of those to be able to distribute and decentralize the spreading of tribal knowledge. And finally, we unpack her famous catchphrase, R2NF, responsible to, not for, and what that means in making a successful sales enablement function. I loved recording this episode with Sheevaun. I'm convinced you will also enjoy listening to it. So please sit back and enjoy my episode with Sheevaun Thatcher. Sheevaun, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you, Andrew?
I'm very good, thanks. And I'm very excited to speak to you today. This episode has been a long while in recording. You and I connected about a month ago. And so I'm very excited to chat to you now at the end of a summer in which you've had some time to clear your head and to spend time with family, doing the things that you love. So I feel like it's a great time to sort of unpack some of the lessons that you perhaps reflected on over the career that you've had so far. And I would love to start that conversation by looking at sort of the genesis of your role as a sales enablement professional and how that coincided with it becoming a sort of official role, which I think you've sort of said is only within the last decade, but you've been doing this for 15 years. So how did it start? How did you sort of create this role at the place you were at?
So I had been a pre-sales leader for a long time. I carried a bag for a while and realized that the end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year pressure and the what have you done for me lately and that it was just too much. I loved being part of the process, right? You love a win, and I loved being there to hold, as I used to tell people, I used to hold the bucket for the blood, and at the end of every quarter, I just pour it back into the cellars, right? It's like, I got you, you're okay.
Yeah.
But I didn't want the risk. Or that level of risk. There's still risk. Yeah. So I got onto the pre-sale side of it. I was already technical in nature. I'd been IT. I'd done a lot of different things. But I really loved the business impact that you could have from a technical perspective, right? Because all too often it is, pre-sales people are feature function. Yeah, they don't have to be. That's the ultimate, but they can really be a very integral part of that sales process. So over the years, I transformed what pre-sales looked like at the companies I was with so that it became much more of a strategic part of the acquisition, as opposed to being go off and do a POC or just answer this technical question. You could structure demonstrations, you could have conversations. Everything was going to be very different in my perspective, right? Start big, do the James Bond movie, and then tell them how you got there.
Yeah.
And listening and coaching and doing all that. Well, that was just a natural lead in to this next thing. So during the last recession, I actually fell into this position because I had the choice of taking a package or doing this new thing. And when I asked what this new thing was, my sales leader at the time said, "You've run a field team in enablement of 80 odd people for a number of years, and I've never had to worry about you. They've always been prepared. They've always been professional. We've always had great. I want you to do whatever you're doing with them and do it with the whole sales team." And so I'm like, what does that mean?
What have I been doing?
And hers was just do what you do, right?
Yeah.
Do the voodoo you do, and let's do something different here. And so that's really where it started. Now, it wasn't called sales enablement then. I mean, we didn't have a name for it, right? My vision was still fairly narrow. I still considered it to be just onboarding and occasional training. I didn't see it as a real functioning strategic role.
Yeah.
And so my first title, I got to name myself, right? My first title was VP of Global Success Metrics, right? How do you measure it? So that was really what it was about. But even then, for me, it was about measurement, right? It wasn't just let's get the training done. It's how do you measure it? And so as time went on, I realized that if the trainings just came from my brain and the onboarding just came from my brain, I was missing a lot of pieces. If I approached it from an L&D perspective, I was missing the pieces, which is what is the actual experience of the people that are out there doing it? Is it working? Is it not? And so I started to have a lot more conversations. It became much more tactical in nature, right? Instead of being, we're going to do an onboarding once a month, and when a product release, we'll do a training, it became more of a, let's look at the full sales process. Let's see where we can help, and let's see where we get gaps. Where do we get dips? Let's look at the data. Let's see what's there. So it became much more tactical. In order to address this issue, let's do this. In order to address, let's do this. So more of the bartender thing that you and I were talking about, right?
Yeah.
You know, this, fix your broken things.
Yeah.
Very tactical in nature. Well, then that again started leaning us into, if we can get ahead of this, and start thinking about what are the actual goals that we're trying to achieve, what is the actual go-to-market, does it make sense, and then how do we make sure that our stakeholders, our constituents, are receiving the best possible support, whether that is training or whether that is enablement, other types of enablement, like going on calls or listening or hearing or whatever that is. It became much more strategic, and it became more of a, what are they getting in? What is their input for the expected output, for the expected result? And we started to see that there was a disconnect, for example, between marketing and sales. So from a strategic point of view, how do we fix that? Well, you have to find out what the issue is, right? And if you talk to a marketing person, they'll tell you we create all this great stuff and sales never uses it. And sales response is typically, yeah, they keep throwing this stuff over the fence, but it doesn't do us any good. We can't use it. And so it was just looking at that and saying, well, what's the disconnect? Well, the disconnect is two things. Number one, they don't know what it is they're receiving, right? So the first thing marketing has to do is tell them why they should care about it, right? What is it? Why should they care? What's in it for me? And then the second thing is, how is it going to help them get their customer to pay attention and buy from them? Marketing was brochureware, here, sell it like this.
Yeah.
Go to a trade show, that'll do it. No. Yeah. What they needed to know was, what are the conversations? What are the questions I need to ask? What is the compelling event that might exist at my prospect, my customer site, that I can dig into and reach and do all that? Marketing, that's what I need from you. You give me that, then I can take all of this other fabulous content and introduce it. But I need to have the right to do that in the first place. And so that was kind of the beginning of the strategic model in my head, was saying, okay, doesn't have to be, it can be fairly simple. As I say, I mentioned Santucci earlier, Scott's term of, everything is simple, simple's hard. It's a rather simple thing to think about, but it can be difficult to put in process. But that's where the strategy came about. And it was that. And then I started saying, this is a business. This is not a function. Yeah. This is a business within a business. I've got investors. I've got a supply chain, and I've got customers. And in that triangle, there is strategy, there's connectivity, there's collaboration, and there's cooperation. And that is really where my vision of enablement came from. And that is how I approach enablement. And it's from that. And that's what grew. And, you know, I took that, I had the model finally designed and set, and this is what my vision is. I took that to RingCentral 5.5 years ago when the stock was at 20. And in 4 years, we had the stock almost to 500. My team went from 3 people to 162. And all of that was because I gave my investors back what they wanted, which was results and performance, right? I gave my supply chain back what they wanted, which was adoption. Their stuff was actually being used. And I gave my customers what they wanted, which is the best possible programs to help them have new types of transformational conversations with their customers. And it was doing that, we got the results back, and everybody was satisfied in that triangle of business.
Yeah. I mean, we're done, right? I mean, the episode's done. You've answered all of my questions here. That was the most comprehensive first answer I've ever received on the show. Obviously, jokes aside, you've actually given me so much to dig into here. So that was fantastic. That was a really, really helpful overview of how you've thought about this conceptually. I want to highlight a couple of things that I heard. This shift from order taker, which, I mean, even then it wasn't, because the role hadn't been defined, right? But I think now a lot of people can feel like an order taker in their role, and you already saw like it wasn't that role. You've written about, and I feel like this is the opposite of that. This is where like people want to get to, is player coach. You see yourself as sort of that player coach, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I want to unpack that a bit, because I think that's an interesting difference. You also talk about, this is where you and I resonate, I resonate with what you said very deeply, is you said it wasn't in your brain, it wasn't you pushing stuff out. Same thing with the marketing example. It was a bottoms up approach to say, like, you need to understand it. Everyone in that sales force is actually, the answer kind of sits within their heads, and we want to try to get that out of it. Then also, I think a very holistic, systemic approach to this, when you looked at like, well, what are the handoffs between marketing? You talk about the supply chain, and I think that's a very like systems approach to looking at this, as opposed to like the tactical focus you mentioned. So where to start? And success metrics and how to measure it, I think also super key. So I want to unpack the player coach analogy a bit, because I think that's quite an interesting one. What are the similarities you see there in terms of the traditional player coach in a sports team, and where you saw your role forming around this?
So if we take a sports team, let's take, football, soccer, whatever, you've got the coach, right? And the coach is the CRO. That's the person that is driving the team, making the ultimate decisions for the team. There's a general manager, and that's typically the COO, hanging out there going, let's make sure we're doing it right? You're getting all the pieces together. Yep. But then they have special team coaches. They have they have the keeper coaches and the the offensive line and defensive line coaches. They have all of those. Those are like the segment VPs, if you will, that report into the CRO. Yeah. Their goal is to make sure that their part of this team is functioning the best way possible. And they're functioning to the ultimate vision that the CRO has, right? So everybody's got to be functioning there. They all have a part to play. If any one of these parts fails, then the whole thing can fail. You see that all the time, right? Yeah. We just became we're season ticket holders with the Angel City Football Club, which is the women's professional soccer team out of LA. Yeah. And, I really wasn't into soccer for very long, but I've started, we fly down for the games. I mean, that's how involved. That's awesome. We just got some field level seats. We're like, yay, we're so excited.
That's great.
So it's, starting to actually see how it works and the beauty of it when it's done well, right? I pass to you, you pass to me, everything goes well. So, there's a couple of things there. The coaching part, first of all, know who you're coaching and what your coaching is supposed to be, know how your coaching is going to align with the other coaches on the team to make sure you're all playing the same thing, and know what you do for the ultimate goal. In the case of business, the ultimate goal is the customer.
Yeah.
Right? This is where you run into silos all the time in business, right? I've got an enablement team that does, or a sales team that is working just with solution engineers, and they're doing all their training and all of that. Then I've got another team that does professional services. Then I've got another, but they don't share, they don't, right? You've got all this duplication, different messages. Everybody's working separately. When you look at it like a player coach, it's quite different. We have our special teams. They all have to work together ultimately to make the team work. There are people from each one that are being used. And then you have the athletic coaches, the ones that come in to say, hey, you know what? Looks like you've got a bit of a sore over there. You're not kind of, running. You got a bit of a hitch and you're giddy up on your left side.
Yeah.
Come on in. Let's take a look at it and we'll figure out how we're going to fix that so that you can go back out and be the best player you can be. That's the player coach. That's where enablement is.
Yeah.
Enablement is the one that's there going, you might have missed this, keeper coach, but, she wasn't jumping quite as far out as we want to, or the hands were too low, or she was starting, or whatever that is. That's where we come in.
Yeah.
And we say, we saw that. We've got the data to back it up. Here's what we think needs to be done to fix that. Let's practice fixing it. Now let's go again.
It's a very proactive role.
Very. That's why it's so strategic, right? You don't want an enablement team that's going to sit back and wait to be told what to do. You don't. All of us could, when you think about it, go out there and close business if we weren't so risk averse, right?
Yeah.
Pre-sales people, that's the same thing. If they weren't so risk averse, they'd be going out and selling it, right?
Right.
But it's the risk mitigation that we're after. But when you understand and you can see the whole field and you can see how the whole game works, that's where enablement can be so strategic, because we are hooked in to every single part of the group. We're not just a section of it.
Yeah. I also love the way you say you're describing the women's soccer team there, and how when it works, it's beautiful. There is like a beauty to that. Right? Like, and it's true in business. When you take, I look at it from a business owner perspective, and going from like an individual contributor through career to like anybody, right, goes into that role, and you kind of start to see like how it all fits together, and then taking responsibility and ownership for that, and saying, where can I add value? Where can I support people? And that's the key. You are supporting people to be the best they can be in those roles. That's what makes us SEE professionals tick, right?
Right. But it's based on data. It's based on measurable outcomes. And it's based on the ultimate goal, which in business would be the go-to-market. What's our go-to-market? Does everybody understand it? Right? Those are my 4 pillars I talk about. Right? You have to know what the go-to-market is. Be involved in creating it if you need to, so that it's focused on the why, not the how and the what. What's our go-to-market? Does everybody know it, regardless of the role in the company? It doesn't have to be a seller. If somebody's pushing a broom, they should understand the go-to-market and be able to do their, what do you do? Yeah. Right? What does Curious Lion do? Boom. Yeah. And you've got it, right? It's not, we do courses. There's a goal. You have to make sure that everything in support of that, whether that is T-shirts or scripts or logos or, websites, that it's all aligned around that go-to-market. Then you have to make sure that whenever your clients come in, or you ever have folks that are looking for something, they can find it easily. Not only find it, there's a single version of it, but it's in different modalities that they need at the time. Maybe it's a video they need to watch. Maybe it's a white paper. Maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's a script. Maybe it's just, an image, whatever it is, a deck. They can find it when they need it. It's all aligned with what's there. And then the last part, which is why you do these podcasts, which is why customer, CABs exist, right? Is it working? Does it work or does it not? That's the tribal knowledge piece. That is how I went from being a trainer to a tactical enablement person to a strategic leader. Is because of that 4th piece, is because of that tribal knowledge, and saying, is what I'm doing even working? And if it is working, great. How can I make sure to get it everywhere? If it's not working, let's get it and stop it now as soon as we can. And so that's kind of the 4 pillars, and all of those go together.
Yeah. So I want to double click a little bit on that tribal knowledge. How would you define that? What is tribal knowledge to you in the context of a business?
Tribal knowledge is understanding how your customers buy from you. It's understanding why they buy from you. It's understanding when they buy from you. It's understanding when they don't. It's understanding why they churn. It's understanding how they may be listening to your competitors instead of yourself. I hate getting into competitive battles. I mean, my answers usually when I get an objection that's based on a competitor is like, okay, well, that's what they said. Well, here's the truth around it. Maybe there's some truth in there, but here's the reality. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about what you want. Yeah. What is it that you need, right? Yeah. If they give it to you or we give it to you, that's your decision. But what are you really looking for? That's really where I want to spend my time. And so tribal knowledge is understanding all of that. It's being open to asking questions, and it's being open to being vulnerable with your customers, right? You have to be vulnerable and be ready to take the hit. Yeah, it happens. Yeah, and take it on the chin. If it's legit, yeah, our bad. Yeah, we'll learn from it. Give us apologies. What can we do to fix it? Here's what we learned from it. Here's how we're not going to do it again. What can we do to help you?
Yeah, so this is a meaty topic for me. I love this, the naming of it, tribal knowledge. To me, it sounds like you're talking, what you're describing is also tacit, right? It's tacit knowledge. It's not something, you can't put it in a playbook, for example, right? Like you can maybe put principles and pointers around it, but each person kind of has to experience it themselves. It's going to vary by culture. It's going to vary by geo. It's going to vary by person. Right. It's going to vary by your customer. As you said, it is tacit. It is in the moment knowledge. It's in the moment understanding, and it's being and of course that also leads to you have to be able to turn on a dime based on what you hear. Yeah, exactly. And it's trust. There's a tremendous amount of trust there. Yeah. That what you're hearing is the truth. You can triangulate your questions to make sure you're getting what you need, but you got to trust that what you're hearing is the truth, because you're about to make, in some cases, significant business changes, business process updates based on what you're hearing. But you can't go blind. You have to have these conversations. Yeah. And so enabling or equipping people to have these conversations is there's no top-down approach that works for this. You can't transfer this information into someone's head. You have to equip them and enable them to be able to, like you say, ask the right questions, listen attentively, do all these kind of things to be able to gather information, and then, ways to filter it and all of that to make the right decision. And this is where a player coach comes in. Yeah. Because when I'm dealing with this individual that may be struggling, I am actually showing them what I mean. I am asking the questions. I am doing the, the digging and the understanding and, empathetic, because just I am, right? I've been there. I know what it feels like. But it's demonstrate what good looks like, and then your people will use it by osmosis. This is why that coaching is vital, vital. And it's not, what have you done for me lately? It is skill set coaching. It is, how do you ask the questions? You have to do that. Yeah. That's a perfect description of this bottoms up approach, where it's people teaching people, right, within the organization. So how have you found success in scaling that? Because that's right. That involves a lot of people, and it's a lot of one-on-one or group type work. But how have you seen success scaling that type of approach? Consistency, that there is a cadence to these meetings, these discussions, these one-on-ones, that there is a consistency to them. Everybody is doing it the same way. And it's like that old shampoo commercial, right? They tell two friends and they tell two friends, and so on and so on and so on. And once people start to see it working and start to see the skill and start to see the information they get, they start to teach others, and they start to teach others, and it just starts to grow. You can have programs in place to teach this. That's how you start it.
And you do it with role playing, you do it with practice, and you do it with, repetitive training, and you do it with scripts, right? You give them scripts here, here's how you handle objections. Here's how you, right? You get all of that. You can do basic playbooks, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. You can't do a hard and fast playbook because what you said yesterday might not work tomorrow.
Yeah. Hey, it's your host, Andrew here. I wanted to take a second just to say that if you're enjoying this podcast, we would love it if you did a couple of things for us. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. It really allows us to grow the channel and reach a lot more people like you. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, take a moment to leave us a rating and review. It's a great way to give us some feedback and to tell the world what you think about this podcast. So whether you listen to it on YouTube or you listen to it as a podcast, if you take one of those actions, it would mean the world to me and my team. Thank you. And with that, right back to the show. That's you basically described our philosophy there, which is that I love that analogy of that shampoo commercial. I know exactly what you're talking about because it's exactly what happens, and you need to have some kind of process to start this, and that word spreads, and that people step up and take on. You mentioned coaching roles; it could be formal and informal, and the stuff starts to just spread naturally. So let's talk about also just those roles specifically. How formalized do you make this? So on the one end of the spectrum, it could be just let's bring a bunch of salespeople together and have a discussion. You mentioned consistency and cadency, but do you also kind of assign roles within that? What role does a manager play versus someone who's just a contributor? What are your thoughts on that?
Manager's play is critical in this. The manager is critical. We actually created, in my first year at RingCentral, our biggest challenge was get enablement in place, support the sellers, make sure that we had a really good sales new hire training, make sure we had a single location of the truth, right? So we had a portal, because none of that existed. Make sure that we, had ways of reporting back and gathering data, things like that. So that was our first year. But we realized in the second year pretty closely that most of the managers, as you see in a lot of companies, especially vendor companies, most of the managers have come up through the ranks. They're really great sellers, so we're going to make them a manager. Sometimes that's a good idea, sometimes not so much. But regardless, they haven't had any management training. They've had leadership training. HR is really good on that. Let's teach them how to be a leader and, have those career conversations. But nobody has taught them how to coach their people through not only the sales process, but the customer's buying journey. You have to coach them. Are you aligned at the right times? Are you doing the right things at the right times? So we called it the Leadership Enablement and Development Program. And what it was, we worked with a third-party vendor. They came in and they helped us create these playbooks that were meant for the managers and all the way up. And these playbooks said things like, here are the 4 things that you need to coach your people around, like, planning. And I've got a sheet here, sales execution, pipeline forecast, and team development. Okay. Those are the 4 things. All too often, all 4 of those things are jammed into a one-on-one that may or may not happen. Instead, we said, no, we want to have separate one-on-ones for these. And they have a schedule and a cadence. So if you're talking about account management, for example, right, you're probably going to have that maybe once a year at the end of the year, maybe twice a year. Territory management, you might have once a quarter. Pipeline management, you're probably talking once every 2 weeks. Forecast management, it's probably every week, right? So you have a cadence to these so they know on this one-on-one, we're talking about pipeline. And here are the questions that me as a manager, we even went that deep to say, here are the questions you should ask your seller to get to what it is you're looking for and end up with an action item. If this is an account management thing, here it is. If this is a territory planning, here it is. And so not only did we say this is when you should do them, we actually put them on their calendars. And then we had something set up in our learning package to say, when you do a coaching session, once a month for every person, you need to get into the system and say, excuse me, what did you coach on? What were the results of it? What are the action items? Go. And so we had it set up to do that, so that this book, it was an 11 by 17 spiral bound, 11 or 17 long, 11 high spiral bound book that still sits on the CRO's desk. He still looks at it because it is so detailed about what to do. But it's this coaching of the managers which allows us to push through how these things are done. Because if you teach the managers how to do it, then they can teach their people.
Cascades.
The other thing that was so critical here was the number of accounts that everybody was looking at. Because it's so easy to be overwhelmed, right? Totally easy to be overwhelmed. Oh my God, I got 25 accounts. I got 50, I got 500, depending on what it is. You know, as a manager, if your people each have 25 accounts they're working on, and you've got 5 people, that's 125 accounts. You can't manage all of those as a manager. You can't look into them. Right. So instead, what you say is, team, each of you pick 5. Now I have 25 to take a look at. And then my manager goes across his management team and says, each of you pick 5. Now I have 25. And so what that does is it keeps the focus on the accounts that really matter. It means that you don't end up with the super reps at the end of every quarter because the managers are focusing on the right deals. Yeah. And you've got sellers that are learning the right skills so that their careers advance. With this great, you know, I'm going to call it the great retention, right? But with all the turnover, there's a study done, and 75%, about 75% of the people that were asked who had left said, what would have kept you there? Their answer was coaching and professional development.
Yeah. Amen.
Right? They didn't get any. They weren't getting any help. They left.
Yeah. What a wonderfully distributed and decentralized way to go about this. You've got like it, you know, so that one-on-one level. I also love the emphasis on focus, down to picking those few accounts to focus on, and also just having each meeting be around a specific pillar or topic.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, because you've heard, hey, how you doing? How's the family? What's going on? Yeah. What have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
It doesn't get anything done.
Exactly. And then the focus is on in this other context on growth, on development, like you say, which is I don't know if you agree with me. I feel like people in leadership, like in C-level roles, don't fully appreciate the sort of sense of belonging and I don't even know what the word is for this. The sort of commitment and loyalty you get from people when you make that level of investment, that personalized development, you know, for each individual, like you're describing there, where you've built that system to do that.
They're learning pretty damn fast.
Thanks.
I would say that no, they didn't. But there are a few places and a few companies that I've spoken with over the last few months that get it. They're like, we recognized. I mean, there was, you know, I talk about these studies. It was the Association of Sales Managers of the, you know, universe, whatever it was called. But they asked for the top 50 motivating factors for sellers, what motivated them to do their jobs and motivated them to succeed. Money wasn't even in the top 20.
Yeah, I've seen this.
Not even the top 20. Coaching was number 1. They wanted coaching, help me be better. Yeah. And that's what a lot of sales managers just didn't know how to do. So that's what we did. And that is how we were able to change it and transform it so that people were focusing not only on the right business, but the managers were focusing also on the right business and not running around like E.T. through the cornfield, you know, trying to close all the business at the end of the quarter. It just wasn't happening.
Yeah, no, I love that model. So I want to another sort of aspect of your role at RingCentral. When you left, you wrote about how this team that you had built and how important they were to your success and all that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? But you know, in the context of RingCentral, but then also, you know, what does a strong, successful sales enablement team look like? What do you need on your roster?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Good questions. Yeah. When I came on board, they were all individual contributors. And so we had to grow. And we grew partly because the investors gave us money, partly because supply chain gave us the right things that we could use, and partly because the relationship with the sellers and the sales management. So sales management are my customers, not the sellers. They're the end users. My customer is sales management. And it was that relationship that just got better and better and better. And as that relationship got better and better and better and stronger, my teams also got better and stronger. They realized that they were partners in this, right? All too often, somebody will come to them, an enablement person, and say, hey, we have this problem, or hey, I have this idea, go do it. And we just go, oh, okay, and run off and go do it. No questions back about, is it measurable? Does it align with the go-to-market? Does it even make sense for your team? I've already got all these other priorities. What do you want me not to do right now in order to do this? Like, help me prioritize this. And it was teaching them how to answer and ask those questions that got them to be so much better in what they did. And so much relied upon now by sales management from first line all the way up to have these discussions about what is it that we really need to do. You know, I think of my, you know, essentially there are two leaders. I had two successors, very, very strong, both of them. One on acquisition, one on the full CX customer experience kind of thing. Either of them would be amazing creating their own enablement programs, right? They're running ones at RingCentral. Now one has 40 people, one has 70, right? Both as individual contributors when they started, both in less than 4 years creating, you know, coming up and moving up this rank. You need individuals that are willing to take risk. And as they move up the rank, not only are they willing to take risk, but they're also willing to take responsibility. The only reason my teams took the kinds of risks they did and came up with these amazing programs is because I guaranteed them and then a couple of times showed them that if it didn't turn out the way they wanted, it was on me and their jobs weren't at risk. Right? That is very important to me because I never felt that during my career. I never had somebody that I felt would say, you got to come through me to get to her. And so I was determined I was going to create that environment. They have now created that same environment for their people because they've seen the result of it. Every single enablement manager at RingCentral knows that risks are important, provided they're aligned. As I said, there's a measurable outcome, it's aligned with go-to-market, and it's the right thing for the business. Those things are there, then go, do it. And if it doesn't turn out, I don't believe in failure, never have. I think failure is just being in a place you can count on. Right? Anytime I hear somebody say it's a big failure, it's like, man, no, it just didn't turn out the way we wanted. So what went wrong? Right? We had enough information before we started it to know that it was aligned. So you can't say it's a failure because you just went off and did something blah. Something changed. What changed? Let's figure out what that was. How do we handle it going forward? And let's not do this again. Now what? And keep going. And so nobody ever lost their job. Nobody ever got chastised for it. It was a coaching moment. And it was, what are you going to learn? And so by giving them the freedom to do this, first of all, starting when I started there, everybody below, it goes up, right? You know, a rising tide raises all boats. And that's exactly what happened. And now these two leaders and the leaders under them and the ones under them, because it's quite a structure now, all have that same mentality, right? It's one for all and all for one. That risk taking is not only is it important, it's imperative in order for you to advance. And and I love this one, do not trade innovation for increment. Right? Don't trade innovation for increment. Keep trying to think outside the box, especially now. Right? Now you're starting to see, you know, like I think about when I was in school, right? When I was a kid in school and we didn't have the internet, we didn't have any of that. So we had to memorize all of the provincial capitals and all the state capitals of the world and we had to memorize it all. That was really important. They're still doing that. Which to me is like, why? Right? One Google search in 2 seconds and you've got the answer. Right? You've got the tech to do that. So why are we still doing that kinds of thing? So it's thinking outside the box. When we created the portal, even with my first initial folks at RingCentral, when we created the portal, I had one whiteboard pen, just one. I had one black one, and I handed it. I had a group of, there were 4 of us. I said, this is the one we're going to use. And we got one whiteboard, we're going to design it. And so it fostered a lot of creativity because they knew they had to have the pen to do it, right? So I got an idea, right? And so, competitive over the pen. But one thing that happened is they created something, and I said, okay, so explain that to me. They said, well, the sellers will do the searching. They'll come here, they'll do that. And I said, okay, they're not going to do that, right? And they said, well, they should. I said, yes, they should.
Yeah.
They're not going to. So what are you going to do? How are we going to fix that? Oh, they said. Yeah. And so it's learning.
Yeah, that's learning.
I'm fortunate I had, decades of great mentors, and now I give back.
Yeah.
That's why they are where they are.
Yeah. Wow. What people, whoever's listening to this now, watching it, should rewind the last 2 minutes and just play this back. Because I was going to ask you a question next, which was, what does a learning culture mean to you? And I think you've just answered that in those 2 minutes. You talked about the creativity, the freedom to experiment, to take risks, the innovation versus increment. Such a great description there. I've often said learning isn't the transfer of information; it's the transformation of the individual. And I think that that seems to resonate with you. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to equip people. And I think the benefit of you having built this team from scratch and to RingCentral's benefit now is that you did start it from the ground up, because what I've seen is one of the hardest things of really kind of forming a culture of learning in a company is that the leadership not buying in and not being vulnerable and not taking risks, right? But now, because you started that from the beginning, you've got it all the way out.
I told RingCentral that I wasn't going to come there until I knew that I had the commitment and the full commitment and the agreement that I would do my voodoo with their support. Otherwise, I wasn't coming. And I think, a really simple example is the guy that ran Enterprise at the time. His name was Mitch. He was down in LA. I was doing my pitch, my stand and deliver up here in San Francisco. And when I had talked about the business and talked about the pillars and did all that, and he said, I love it. Sounds great. What are you going to do if my people don't do it? I said, Mitch, I'm not going to do anything. What are you going to do if your people don't do it? And he chuckled. And I said, that's the linchpin of what makes sales enablement work at an organization, is that you are responsible for the execution. I call it R2N4, which is responsible to, not for. If you see that hashtag R2N4, that's me. And we're responsible to the sales organization. They are responsible for the execution of the programs. That is the piece. And that is at RingCentral. That's why it was so successful, is because if somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do, their manager is the one that was a disciplinarian. The result of that is that every enablement program from the time we started to now and going forward is a choice. The moment sales enablement becomes the one responsible for the execution of it, it becomes a chore. And when it becomes a chore, you never, ever get it back. So enablement cannot be the stick. They can never be the stick. We can create the best programs in the world, have the best investment, have the best supply chain. But if that relationship isn't there, and the responsible for and the accountability is not there on the sales side of this equation, it's not going to work. Doesn't matter how good it is. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, wow, that's really, I haven't thought about it in that sense, and that relationship between the enablement team and the sales leadership team. That's given me a lot of food for thought there. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm gonna ask with a couple of questions to wrap this up. I could probably talk for another hour with you about this stuff, but you're exploring new opportunities. You're going to end up somewhere inevitably at some point. What's one of the first things you're going to focus on at a new role?
Is understanding the relationship between the sales leadership and enablement. My guess is it's not as good as it could be, and it's creating that business within a business. It's to get people stop talking about enablement as trainers And it's to get them to start thinking of them as personal coaches. It's very different. And it's a mindset. It's an understanding, and it's a way of even just the words you use, right? I don't use the word need if I can avoid it, because by saying I need something, it implies it's going to come from an outside source. I use the word want. I want something. That's the same with all the enablement folks, right? I want this program to work properly. So what are you going to do to do it? How are you going to do that? How are you going to pull the pieces together? Is a different conversation than I need this program to work properly. For who? Why? What's the issue? What's going, right? There's just a negative versus a positive. So that's the first thing, is going in, assessing what the culture looks like. What does the learning environment look like? Great stuff, amplify it. Things that are a challenge, find out why they're there. How did they get there? Who was involved in it? Because you don't want to call the baby ugly. Be careful of that. Who was involved in it? And find out what the appetite is, essentially, to flip it. It can be transformed. I've done it before a number of times. I can do it again, and I know what the result is. And the result is a team of 162 people from 3 in 4 years, and a stock that goes from 20 to 485 before the market dropped. Right.
All moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a very sensible approach. And sort of a follow-on question to that is, what time frame, what time horizon do you give yourself for those results to start to show?
To get a fully functioning enablement program working and firing on all cylinders, especially since we don't have 400 or 500 people to do it, and there is a lot of work, you're probably looking at a year to 18 months.
Yeah. You
can get quick wins pretty fast. You can start making changes pretty quickly. It's going to take you a while to get the data anyway. I mean, I started in February. At the end of that year at RingCentral, the CRO was like, I need some data. And I said, well, I can't give you a year's worth of data. He said, well, why not? I'm like, because programs have only been around and in place for 4 months. That's not enough data to give you. I can give you anecdotal things. I can give you feedback, but I can't give you the other things. So it takes time to build that up. And then there's just assessing what's going to work and what isn't culturally, right? Have you gotten into an environment where the leader of the pack is the leader of the pack, and what happens, or do you have somebody that is a servant leader? That's very different.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? You've got the one sitting on the throne with the whip, and you've got the one in front going, come on, guys, take the hill, right? I mean, that's a very different approach.
Leading by example. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm semi-resisting asking you these follow-up questions because this is so fascinating. But maybe if there is a quick answer to this, because we face this as well, right? It does take 12 to 18 months for things to show. You mentioned those quick wins, though. Are there any that are common? Like, these are some of my quick wins that I'll get it no matter what the company is, or is it totally contextual?
I think some of the quick wins, the relationship between marketing and sales, that's a quick win. You can get that done and get them to understand each other. That's a quick win because you're going to start getting your content properly. The agreement on accountability, up and down the chain on the sales side. You start at the top. That's not a bottoms up. You start at the top and you work your way down. Right. And you have to make sure, like in the companies I'm talking to, I'm like, if I don't have the commitment from you and your VPs and your RVPs, and, I get frontline managers can be a challenge, but if I don't have the commitment down to that level, there's no point in me coming because it's too hard. Right. You can't get accountability going up. It's got to be coming down.
Yep.
And so that's a big one. Getting people to think different. Right. Take risks. Take risks, even small ones, even little ones.
Yeah, and like you said, anecdotally, you can show that. That's really.
I mean, there's a number of people I know that are looking for jobs, right? And they're like, well, I'm kind of afraid to call this person because I might get a no. And I went, okay, but you might get a yes.
Yeah.
So get on the phone.
Right.
What happens if you get a yes?
Right.
Well, yeah. It's like, come on.
You'll deal with it. Exactly.
Right. There's no such thing as failure.
Yeah.
A no is simply data. That's all it is. And all it is you didn't set something up right. let's go at this from a different angle.
Yeah. I love it. That's super helpful. Yeah, as I said, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff, Sheevaun. But my final question today, why do you do what you do?
I do what I do because I believe customers need to be respected. I believe that if they are going to invest in you and they're going to invest in what it is that you are supplying to them, then you need to give them the best possible experience, the best possible solution. And I believe that people want to do that. The days of don't confuse the sale with the install, the days of I'm going to see how far I can, get on this deal, or how much I can ignore a discount, or, negotiation, we win, you lose. That doesn't help anybody, right? It just doesn't. And my whole approach to life has always been around respect. It's been around, having the critical conversations instead of the artificial harmony, right? How you doing? I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right? Is a different answer than how are you doing? I'm fine.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's understanding that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really what it is. I've learned a lot. I've got a lot to give back. And I love watching people who don't believe they can do these things and go far beyond what they even think is possible.
Yeah. Amen to those light bulb moments that you see in people, right? That's what keeps us going in our profession. Sheevaun, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me, sharing your wisdom. I want to give you final closing words as well. Anything you want to share, anything you want to encourage listeners and viewers to check out.
I think going forward, especially now, we really have to question the status quo. I think we have to be very bold. The world is different than it was 2 years ago. Enablement 2 years ago was a nice to have. Now companies are realizing it is a must have. Because we're the only ones that have our fingers in every piece of the pie, right? We're the only ones that understand that working with the customer is a full journey, right? It's not just the acquisition and then they get pawned off to somebody else, right? I was using this as an analogy, right? As a customer, I'm down here and I have to figure out who I'm supposed to work with at a customer. We did this, we're turning it this way. This is the way I want to approach it. The customer is at the top and we are the services skirt at the bottom. We are the ones that have to figure out how to do what we need to do for this. And it's a simple move, but it's really what's required. And that is where we have to go forward. CS is coming up much, much stronger than it ever was. The full customer journey has got to be there. You've got to swarm to the problem as a company, not as a business unit. You can't say, no, that's not mine. Give it over here. It's like, no, what do we need to do? Figure out what needs to be done. Get the right people on it, right? My mom had this great saying, and that a camel is a horse designed by committee, right? Stop creating camels, and let's create the thoroughbreds that we really need, right? But you do that by being quick, not going for perfect, right? And taking risks. I mean, that's really what it is, right? Don't confuse innovation for increment. Putting a Band-Aid on only works so far.
Beautifully said. Thank you to everyone listening and watching. Sheevaun, thank you again, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it, Andrew. I'm glad we got to do this.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listen. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.